The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
President Obama has indeed now announced his plans for executive action over immigration. He gave a 15-minute address from the East Room of the White House, and he wanted to appeal really to compassion and to the idea that the motivation for him taking this action, of course, aside from the logistical motivation of Republican obstructionism, is rooted in compassion for people, saying that deporting millions of people is not who we are. He also cited scripture, quote, "We shall not oppress a stranger, for we know the heart of a stranger. We were strangers once too." He went on to say, quote, "The actions I'm taking are not only lawful, they're the kinds of actions taken by every single Republican president and every Democratic president for the past half century." To those members of Congress who question my authority to make our immigration system work better, or question the wisdom of me acting where Congress has failed, I have one answer: pass a bill. This part I really like, Lewis, because President Obama was just very direct in saying Republican inaction, Republicans not passing a bill is what has forced my hand in needing to do this. And I do have the authority to do it. And if you're so worried about it, you could have passed a bill and you could still pass a bill.
And it seems he really did. He covered the whole thing here. He needed to say everything he needed to say. He said in 15 minutes, and he summed things up nicely.
Conservative lawmakers, of course, continuing to insist that President Obama is abusing his power, that he is overreaching, that he is doing things that are unconstitutional. And of course, we know from talking to legal experts that that appears to be not the case. The centerpiece of the president's announcement is a program for unauthorized immigrants who are the parents of U.S. citizens. About 4 million people will be eligible to apply for a new legal status that would defer their deportations and allow them to work legally. They have to pass a background check. They have to be paying taxes, of course. They will receive a Social Security card, according to officials. And then there's an additional million or so people that will have some protection from deportation through other parts of the plan. The president clearly has the authority to do this. This is sensible. This is humane. Congress does nothing, and the president really has no choice. But interestingly enough, there could be problems, not the ones that the Republicans are talking about, but other problems that come from this. And I was actually talking this morning, Lewis, with our mutual friend who's in the Border Patrol, and he was telling me their concern that in general, everybody he works with, including supervisors, is in favor of this, okay? But their concern is that misinformation is frequently used by cartels and coyotes and those seeking to make money off of Central and South American migrants. And his concern is that this is going to filter incorrectly into Mexico and further south by cartels into, hey, did you hear Obama? It's really easy to just go over and stay now. Give us your money. Sometimes what it takes you 3, 6, 12, or 18 months to earn, and we'll bring you over the border. Of course, we know that this has no bearing at all on the legality of crossing the border without documentation. And so our mutual friend, Lewis, is really worried that this is going to lead to a lot of people losing their money and often their lives.
That is interesting. I'm sure there is tons of misinformation conveyed by the cartels and the coyotes here all the time. And this will probably make things worse for some families and for some people. But overall, of course, we realize that this is a great action by the president.
Some specific Republicans losing their minds over President Obama's recent decision to take action, unilateral action, because of the lack of action from the Republican Party on immigration. Outgoing Congresswoman Michele Bachmann is one of those people. She told reporters that President Obama was seeking to grant legal protection to millions of illiterate immigrants who would then become Democratic voters by 2016. Here's a quote from Michele Bachmann. This is so absurd. Quote, "The social cost will be profound on the U.S. taxpayer. Millions of unskilled, illiterate foreign nationals coming into the United States who can't speak the English language. The president has a very single-minded vision. He's looking at new voters for 2016. Now, Michele Bachmann is arguing that illiterate is not her ad hominem. When she goes to the border, Hispanic people tell her that there's illiterate people coming over and that they'll vote for Obama. Of course, there's no evidence that that's exactly what she was told. She cited no one specifically. And this is just a very offensive way, Lewis, to court Hispanic voters, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll say. And her whole statement is so presumptuous that they're all unskilled, they're all illiterate, and they're all going to vote Democratic. Of course, the last one may be true. After hearing what Obama or Bachmann has to say, how could you not vote Republican?
Well, the funniest thing about that is when you look in the U.S. at how education correlates with political values, the more educated someone is, or further from illiterate on a sort of education spectrum, the more likely they are to vote Democratic. When someone has less education, they're actually more likely to vote for Republican. So Michele Bachmann clearly wrong about that, number one. And number two, literacy rates in many South American countries are the same as here in the U.S. If you look at the next tier, there are even more Central and South American countries where the literacy rates are slightly behind the U.S. And bear in mind that if you adjust for economic standing and for income, there actually isn't that much of a gap at all between literacy rates here in the U.S. and in many other Central and South American countries. So Michele Bachmann, offensive, inaccurate, and just flat out disconnected from the realities of the situation.
And please let her keep saying stuff like this because it's not going to help her party at all.
The outreach to women is not going very well for Republicans, and neither is that outreach to Hispanic voters who are going to be a necessity unless Republicans can figure out a way to get 80% of the white vote in upcoming elections. Another Republican really not liking President Obama's action on immigration, Republican Representative Mo Brooks of Alabama, thinks that they should be sending President Obama to prison for 5 years for his prescription on immigration, and says that he thinks they can actually get it done. Of course, he seems to ignore the fact that all other presidents dating back to Dwight D. Eisenhower have taken similar action on immigration. Betsy Woodruff reported for Slate that Brooks said there is a federal statute, although he admits he doesn't have the citation at the tip of his tongue, that makes it a felony to aid, abet, or entice a foreigner to illegally enter the U.S. He says that has a 5-year in-jail penalty associated with it. Of course, I guess his implication is, Lewis, that by taking this action on immigration, the president is enticing more people to enter the U.S. illegally. I guess if we try to connect the very demented dots that have been laid out by Mo Brooks, that's what he's trying to say.
It seems like that's it. As if there are no other incentives for these migrants to come to this country.
This is a serious, serious case of Obama derangement syndrome. And putting aside just for a second, just for a second, that this is absurd at face value and that every president dating back to Eisenhower did something similar, shouldn't Mo Brooks as an elected official know that presidents generally have very broad immunity when it comes to prosecution related to decisions that they make while performing their duties as president? There are extenuating circumstances in which this would not apply, as we talked about with George W. Bush, of course. But generally speaking, presidents have very broad immunity from prosecution for decisions they take while president. For better or worse, I'm just stating the reality.
They do. But what else is Mo Brooks going to do? Things he campaigned on? That just seems like a waste of time.
I guess maybe create a job or something like that. Maybe prevent a gay couple from getting married, or make someone take a pee test to make sure they're not on drugs to get their $133 in food stamp benefits. That might be something.
When you put it that way, it sounds like he's really got his work cut out for him.
It is Lewis's 30th birthday today. Lewis, happy birthday. What's it like being 30?
It feels pretty much the same as every other year, except it hurts a little bit more physically. I'm falling apart here.
I, of course, turned 30 9 months ago. And I know that's shocking to a lot of people. We still get a lot of emails, Lewis, saying that this kid doing his show in his mom's basement is too young to even be taken seriously. People seem to not realize that I'm 30 years old at this point, which I actually find flattering. That's great. I'm glad to sneak by appearing to be younger than people think. But putting that aside, when I turned 29, I started panicking about turning 30. And I know that it's just 1 year to the next, but something about that 2 rolling over to a 3 really feels very, very different.
And what it really is everyone else's perception of you, because while you're still in your 20s, it's very different from once that 2 rolls over.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to experience that. But most people, like with you, most people guess I'm much younger than I actually am. That's partially why I keep this facial hair out here. But you know what? I feel fine, and I'm fine with turning 30. It's 40 might be a different story, though.
Right. Well, that's within, I'd say, 4 or 5 days of my 30th birthday. All of a sudden, I became very unconcerned with birthdays and age, because when you're 30, what's the difference between 30 and 31? It now feels almost like, hey, whatever. The next 3 years, I think that I'm just fine.
Yeah, I think none of them really have any significance until we hit 40 at this point. Yeah, it's interesting, I guess you could say.
Now, let me remind you, Lewis, there was this moment where I know that since you've stepped back from this, but when we were in like 5th or 6th grade, there was a conversation. It was me,
Here we go.
You, our friend Peter, I believe our friend Mike maybe, and you said very, very directly, I don't ever want to be old. When I turn 60, I'm going to off myself. I'm going to euthanize myself because I don't ever want to go through the process of getting old. Now, you've since rescinded or recanted on that, haven't you?
I have, yes. We were very young at the time. And of course, I'm now seeing many people in their 60s who, you might guess are in their 40s. It's all about how you take care of yourself. And I've been taking care of myself. And I really doubt I'm going to want to do that when I'm 60. That was a child saying something that was just kind of insane.
Well,
absurd.
incredibly. And even 60, I mean, Lewis's grandmother is, what, she's 94?
Yes.
Lewis's grandmother is 94. She's totally hip and with it. Just a few weeks ago, I was over at Lewis's parents' house, and she was telling me about how she knows about YOLO, you only live once. She had a full commentary and analysis of whether YOLO should count as an English word or whether it is not something that should be included in a dictionary. I mean, she's completely with it at 94.
Yes, she is, and she will probably hear this segment. And you know what? Maybe she's an exception to the rule because she seems to just be unaffected by time. But we'll see, David. If we're still doing the show when we're 60, you can bring this up again.
Yeah, and we'll see how Lewis's view changes on that. So happy birthday to Lewis. It is Lewis's 30th birthday. And any big plans, Lewis?
No big plans. Just going to go out tonight, have a few drinks with some friends, nothing crazy. And it'll be totally, totally boring and bland. In
your recent years, you've actually pared down your drinking significantly, haven't you?
Yeah, I really don't drink much at all anymore. If I do, it's really just for taste, not for the effect. And I feel better because of it. Was this related to your body not responding as well the next day when you've been drinking? Yes. How it affects my sleep has played a major role in this. But I find that the less I drink, the less I want to drink. And so, yeah, it's not a part of my life really as much as it used to be.
All right, Lewis's 30th birthday. Huge news. I don't know if this is going to make TMZ or Page 6, but certainly in our universe, this is big time news. We'll take a break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some statistics do suggest that the economy is improving despite having a liberal president, but those statistics obviously have a liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Eric Johnson. Eric, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Couldn't stay on the air without you, and I encourage everyone in our audience to join Eric as members of the David Pakman Show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership or davidpakman.com/calendar15 to get a free calendar with your yearly membership, the 2015 Patriot Mail Calendar. Remember that as the holiday gift buying season gets rolling, or just the buy stuff for yourself season, as it is for many people I know, remember that you can use our Amazon banner at davidpakman.com to send us a kickback for any Amazon shopping that you do. A few interesting items purchased over the last week by our audience on Amazon. A few people, Lewis, buying Sons of Anarchy DVDs. I am now getting into Sons of Anarchy as a TV series. It is not what Breaking Bad was. It is not, for me, what The Killing was. But it is a pretty good series, I must say. I'm increasingly getting sucked in by it.
Do you think that people are buying these because you've been talking about it and recommending it?
No, I don't think so at all. I think people don't take my recommendations seriously at all. And I wouldn't draw any conclusions like that.
Oh, all right. Well, it was just, I know you mentioned it more than once and now people are buying it. I just thought that maybe that was a possibility.
All right. And also somebody purchasing an electric flosser. Now, I'm, of course, very familiar with electric toothbrushes. And I've maybe even spoken on the show, Lewis, about how I've tried electric toothbrushes and I have gone back to a small to medium-sized, soft-bristled manual toothbrush. That's what I find gives me the best results. And I just didn't even realize that there were such things as electric flossers. It doesn't sound that appealing to me, but I know people seem to swear by them.
Yes, I've heard of them. I've never seen one in person, or of course, therefore, I've never used one. And it just seems like, I mean, how much easier can it really be? It seems like there's still a lot you have to do manually, even with an electric flosser. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
What are you on a brush twice a day, floss once a day program, or what's your system?
That's usually my system, depending on what I eat, of course.
Naturally, of course. There might be a need for an additional toothbrush session. Are you using any kind of fluoride rinse?
No, I mean, once in a while I use, not every day, but I use Listerine. I'm not sure if I got the one that has fluoride in it or not, but I think there's fluoride in my drinking water anyway. So I guess you could say I am using a fluoride rinse.
I'm sure that Alex Jones down in Austin really doesn't like the fact that there might be fluoride in your drinking water, though.
No, I know he doesn't because I see it on people's windows written on their cars as they drive around here.
A Canadian woman was in the United States. Was pregnant, had been cleared to travel by her doctors in Canada, didn't seem like she was at risk of having an early, going into labor early, but that did end up happening. She ended up giving birth at an American hospital, and now she owes $950,000, almost $1 million after going into labor early. This is Jennifer Hukulak Kimmel. She was 6 months pregnant when she was cleared by her doctor to leave Canada on vacation. She and her husband purchased travel insurance before flying from their home in Saskatchewan to Maui, Hawaii. 2 days after arriving, her water breaks. She goes into labor 9 weeks early. She gets airlifted to Honolulu. Her daughter is delivered by emergency C-section. She had been at the hospital about a week when her insurance carrier, Blue Cross, notifies her that her coverage has actually been denied due to a pre-existing condition. What was that condition? A bladder infection she'd had during her 4th month of pregnancy. She said her specialist had examined her before her trip with an ultrasound, and the physician determined that the pregnancy was completely stable, saw no reason for her not to go. She told the Blue Cross salesperson about the bladder infection when she bought the travel insurance policy, and the rep said, "You're fine to travel because you're less than 36 weeks pregnant." Bed rest at the hospital, neonatal intensive care unit, these things really add up to a total of $950,000. Of course, she and her husband can't afford to pay the almost $1 million that Blue Cross has billed them. And, Lewis, I blame her. It was her fault that she blindly took the advice of medical professionals without questioning it and deciding for herself that she shouldn't be trusting doctors.
This is an incredible situation. If I were, what would you do if you were in her situation?
Well, I talked to an attorney, and an attorney said that she can most likely just go home to Saskatchewan, not pay a cent, and that it would be very difficult for the hospital to sue her in Canada for the lack of payment in the US. However, that could certainly have the potential for causing legal issues if she were to come back to the US at some point, which presumably she might want to do, although maybe not after having this experience. But that was what one attorney said to me. If she really just refuses to pay, the hospital would have relatively little recourse about this. And because she's in Canada, it likely wouldn't affect her credit either.
That would be my guess. That would be my move. Of course, I think I would have to protest this. But depending on how far it's taken in this country and how bad they want to get her, I mean, even going on a flight that has a layover or transfer somewhere in the United States could be dangerous for her.
Yeah, and I don't advocate just running out on bills. By no means do I advocate that. But the thing is, she did nothing wrong. Her doctors cleared her to travel. She got the travel insurance. She disclosed the prior bladder condition. Why is she now being held liable for what is really an immoral medical and health insurance situation? There is nothing at all that could convince me that it is right, ethical, and moral for one medical situation that was not predicted to ruin a family's financial standing, potentially for their lives. There is nothing moral about that.
No, it seems that she should have been granted the insurance coverage. So my advice to her would be the same as your lawyers. Well, I don't know if it was advice, but stay in Canada and don't look back.
Back in May, I told you that Congressman Paul Ray, who's a Republican from the northern Utah city of Clearfield, was going to introduce a plan to bring back firing squad executions to Utah. The reason that Paul Ray wanted to bring this controversial method back is that more and more states are having trouble getting around drug shortages and lawsuits to get the proper drugs that are needed for a successful lethal injection. So Paul Ray's suggestion a few months ago was, let's look at bringing back firing squad executions. And that indeed is starting to move forward. There's a proposal that has been put forth by Republican Paul Ray. It would call for firing squad if the state can't obtain lethal injection drugs 30 days before the scheduled execution. And Utah lawmakers have so far endorsed this. It's going to be officially brought to the legislature for debate in January, but it appears that it is at least going to be presented. Back in May, it was just an idea from Paul Ray. Now he has presented it. His colleagues say, yes, we will bring this up and we will explore this in January. Under current law, death by firing squad is only an option for criminals sentenced to death before 2004. It was last used in 2010. We have to stop this insanity, Lewis. We have states arguing about how best to kill people. It's a debate over what's the right method we should be using to kill people.
Yes, I wonder if we will see any type of bill or measure to try and outlaw this in every state at the federal level. And
all the libertarians, Lewis, would say it's a violation of states' rights.
They would, but we've seen it happen with other types of legislation. And as far as I know, it's not something that has landed on a president's desk or has been brought up in Congress in recent history. And why is that?
I don't know. And one thing I forgot to mention last week in my discussion with a guest who was in favor of the death penalty in certain situations was 1 in 25 on death row is innocent. That was a key bit of data that is the newest bit of data that has made me even more forcefully be against the death penalty. And when I think about it, we have a society that has deemed murder to be wrong. And if you murder if you murder someone in that society, the state has also deemed that is so wrong that now the state is going to kill you. And I get what some are saying, which is, well, no, David. Once you kill someone else, you were essentially forfeiting your right to be alive. Even if you believe that, it still takes several steps to say, and the state should become the agent of ending those people's lives. I just could not be more against the death penalty. I understand the emotional argument. I can even imagine feeling myself like I would want someone who commits a crime against someone I know to be killed. But when I really analyze it empirically, it's not something that makes sense for the United States to be doing.
And also, it costs an incredible amount of money per person.
Well, some people say, though, Louis, they're like, well, the reason it costs so much is because all these criminals are entitled to all of these appeals. We should kill them much faster. Hey, we already have 1 out of 25 on death row that's probably innocent. Do you know how much that will increase if we start eliminating appeals for people?
Yeah, even with all those appeals, we still can't get it right. So, yes, you're right. It's got to go.
You've heard me talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Next, we will talk to David Dunning of Dunning-Kruger effect fame. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by David Dunning, who is a social psychologist. His research focuses on accuracy and illusion in self-judgment, and you may recognize his last name from the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we have talked about on this program quite a bit. Now, David, I talk about Dunning-Kruger quite a bit, both on the program and in personal conversations, and I don't even want to take the risk of misstating what it is. So let's start there. What is the Dunning-Kruger effect meant to designate?
Well, the way it's understood in popular culture is that incompetent people tend not to know that they're incompetent. Actually, you can scratch that. They're not in a position to know that they're incompetent. They don't have the skills to recognize just how many errors and just how many mistakes that they're making.
And does this apply to a broad range of activity and endeavors in life, or is this really something that when you first explored the phenomena was designed to address a very specific type of circumstance?
Well, there should be some specificity to it. That is, we're talking about areas in life where to produce right answers and correct responses, you need the same skill set that you need in order to judge whether or not a response is correct or not. And there are just a lot of skills in life that are like that. So logic is like that. Problem solving is like that. The theories you use to solve problems are often the theories you use to judge whether or not a problem has been solved. And so though it has some specificity to it, it turns out that there's a broad swath of intellectual skills and a broad swath of social skills that fall into this category.
So increasingly, this has become, amongst many people I know, something they like to refer to when they seem to hit a roadblock in having a political conversation with someone else. And I'll give you an example. You tell me if this is an appropriate application or reference to the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you're talking to someone who, for example, is against abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And they're telling you they really want to reduce the number of abortions, and you explain to them that the way to do that, as has been empirically demonstrated, is you teach people reasonable sex education, you provide access to birth control and the knowledge about how to use it, and you try to prevent pregnancy because most people who have an abortion are pregnant. That's typically the way it goes. And they can't seem to wrap their mind around the fact that they are both against abortion and they want abstinence-only sex education, and they don't want people to have birth control. Is that an example where they're not recognizing, they're not able to understand the logic of what you're telling them? Would this be an appropriate application?
I think that would be an appropriate application. That is, when people just simply can't get your logic for the type of argument that you're making. Now, mind you, this is an appropriate application, but remember that it's also the case that the person on the other side might also be experiencing an appropriate application of the Dunning-Kruger effect, because they may very well have logic that has some soundness to it that we ourselves are not getting. So the one thing I always like to remind people is that Dunning-Kruger is not only a phenomenon that happens with other people, it happens with us, each of us, many more times than we would know. And I'd like people to keep that in mind.
Your work with Dunning-Kruger seems to me to connect also with your work on moral character. And some of your research there has uncovered, maybe not surprisingly to many people, that most people think of themselves as morally superior to everybody else, but don't seem to realize that everybody is kind of victim of this mentality, and thus either everybody is right or everybody is wrong, in which case the difference between you and the others in terms of moral character would logically evaporate, wouldn't it?
Oh, I think that's right, and we've shown that time and again that people do put themselves on a moral pedestal that simply can't be. It's unrealistic. People make judgments of themselves that they just can't attain in reality, and when we observe them going through their lives, don't obtain in reality. And the surprising finding for us is that when it comes to understanding the moral nature of people, we're actually pretty good at understanding other people's moral nature. We understand what's going to influence them, what temptations are going to succumb to, what strengths they have in the moral realm, and what weaknesses they have in the moral realm. And what we tend to do is not apply that wisdom to ourselves. So what we've been able to find is that people are making an error in self-psychology, though they tend to be pretty good social psychologists in judging other people.
If we are to agree, at least temporarily, or for the purposes of this conversation, that in general we're better off if we are more accurately able to evaluate ourselves in relation to the world around us. Some people may not agree with that, but let's assume, at least for this conversation, that we can agree with that.
Sure.
Are there mechanisms that you've identified by which people can talk to themselves, as the case may be, in a way that allows them to get outside of these biases you've identified?
Well, yeah. So one easy way to do it is to just talk with other people. I mean, they're already outside these biases that we've talked about, and sometimes they may be a little nervous about telling us what they really think. But sometimes, if we can get them to tell us what they really think, it can be incredibly useful information that never would have occurred to us. That's number one. Another thing that people can do is ask themselves a question they don't normally ask themselves, and it might be an uncomfortable question, but it might prevent some discomfort later on, which is, instead of thinking about how I might be right in any decision or reasoning I've come to ask how am I wrong? What's wrong with the decision I've just made? And even project yourself into the future and say, okay, my decision turned out drastically wrong. It was a disaster. What happened to make it a disaster? And thinking that way certainly gets you outside of the usual box that we're in, but it also clues us into any objections or reservations that maybe we should be entertaining in the here and now.
So the connection that I saw as I read a lot of your work between people's self-assessment of their morality with the Dunning-Kruger effect is that it seems with the Dunning-Kruger effect, what we have in practice, even though it may not be so explicit, is people are also assessing their own competence to be higher than it is in reality. Is that a fair correlation to draw?
That's a very fair correlation to draw.
And when we go from talking about one's self-assessment of moral character to more issues of competency and the Dunning-Kruger effect, there, it would seem to me that it's tougher to circumvent the limitations because by your very lack of cognitive ability, you're not realizing the area in which you lack. So is that more difficult to get around?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the issue with our moral superiority or our feelings of false moral superiority is a lot of that is active self-deception. A lot of that is in the business what we refer to as motivated reasoning. We're actively trying to hide from ourselves our imperfections. Now, with the Dunning-Kruger effect, our lack of ability to see our imperfections are exactly due to our imperfections. And even though we might be trying hard to come to an accurate vision of ourselves, even though we might be very honest and impartial and thorough in the way that we're judging ourselves, the very fact that we have imperfect competence is going to mean that we're going to have imperfect judgments of ourselves. So the Dunning-Kruger effect happens well beyond any self-deception. This is something that goes beyond self-deception.
Last thing I wanted to touch on with regard to the Dunning-Kruger effect is when we think about intelligence, I think there's this tendency that people generally have to say, well, some people are more intelligent and some people are less intelligent, and it's kind of on a spectrum, but it's an absolute place on that spectrum that people have. Is everyone equally susceptible to the Dunning-Kruger effect at a level that is adjusted for where on the intelligence spectrum they are? Or to say it another way, If you have someone who has a much higher IQ than someone else or much better logical reasoning skills than someone else, are they as equally susceptible to the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it may just be with other topics or when talking to different people than those who may have less intelligence?
Well, we don't know the exact answer to that, but the exact answer I can tell you now is that sooner or later we're all going to fall victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect. That is, no matter how smart you are, you're going to have pockets of incompetence. You're going to be in new situations you've never experienced. You're going to be in areas where you think you know what you're doing, but you don't know what you're doing. And so I don't think it's a question of being equally susceptible or not susceptible to the Dunning-Kruger effect. What I can say is the certainty that each of us is going to succumb to it sooner or later, that probability is 1. The only question is where is it going to happen and how potentially costly it might be.
And if people want to read more about this, where's the best place that your work, where you write about this?
Well, I think sort of a good clearinghouse is the website for our laboratory at Cornell. If you Google Dunning and the term SASI, that's Self and Social Insight, that gets you to our lab website, and there we have a lot of links to various things that people have written about the Dunning-Kruger effect, but also various interviews that I've given as well.
We've been speaking with social psychologist David Dunning. Really great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
The David Pachman Show at davidpachman.com. The David Pachman Show at davidpachman.com.
We've been following the attacks on the EPA. I told you about how Mitch McConnell wants the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, meant to protect the environment. Mitch McConnell wants to rein in the EPA's power to restrict fossil fuel emissions and pollution. It just so happens that Mitch McConnell's own family makes a lot of money shipping coal all around the world, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with why he wants to rein in the EPA. In any case, it turns out that most Americans actually support the EPA being more strict when it comes to limiting emissions. There's a report that was released which tells us that 2 in 3 Americans support stricter restrictions of carbon emissions at America's coal-fired power plants, even after being told that it would lead to slightly more expensive energy prices for them at home. This is a study from Yale's Project on Climate Change Communication. It also found that 2/3 of Americans believe that global warming is happening. However, Lewis, as we continue to explore, 2/3 of Americans believe that the EPA should be placing these strict restrictions on emissions and on pollution from coal-fired power plants. But a lot of them still vote for Republicans who don't believe that. In fact, they believe the exact opposite of that.
I think in many cases, when you have someone who is religious and they have the option of voting for the religious candidate or the candidate who just doesn't really take part in that, regardless of all those other stances and ideas, they're going to just vote for the person who is religious. And I know that's not everyone we're talking about here.
No, but statistically speaking, it's borne out because look at the rest of the study on the issues. 83% want increased funding for making public infrastructure more resistant to extreme weather. 77% want more funding into research for renewable energy. 62% are okay requiring utility companies to get at least 20% of their electricity from wind, solar, or other renewable energy sources. These are quite progressive views, and they are totally disconnected from the policy positions of the right-wingers that are getting elected, and it's more of the same. We've done the analyses over the last 2-3 weeks since the midterms about this. It's more of the same. More progressive on the issues, electing more extreme Republicans.
Yeah. It's misinformation. It's a lack of understanding. It's just a mess. I think getting rid of party affiliation would help with this a lot.
Let's talk about corruption. Senate Democrats successfully blocked a bill last week for the Keystone XL pipeline to go forward. We talked about that last week. We also said this is not the end of this. Once Republicans actually take their majority in the Senate, it is very likely that this is going to come up again. But there's a new study done by those who track political funding that shows that those who voted yes for the Keystone XL pipeline received 6 times more money from relevant companies than those who voted no. The vote came largely along party lines. All Senate Republicans supported it, and they were joined by 14 Democrats, including 3 of the 4 Democratic incumbents who lost their re-election bids earlier in the month, including Democrat Mary Landrieu, the bill's main sponsor. So let's look at the money. The 59 senators who voted for the pipeline over the course of their careers took $33 million in campaign donations from the industry. This is compared to the $4.2 million received by the 41 who successfully blocked the bill's approval. These numbers are staggering, Lewis, and every elected official will say they don't vote based on the money they get. Now, in the interest of being completely precise and accurate with regard to this, the numbers alone need to, number one, be adjusted for how long these individuals have been elected officials, because this is the total they've received over their careers. So if you have people that have been in longer, that allows for more time to receive money. And the other thing is we have to think about whether there might be a reverse correlation here. In other words, it's very easy to imagine how they vote in a particular way because they receive the money, but it's also possible and likely to some extent that the money goes to those who are already likely to be favorable to the fossil fuel industry. We need to explore all of those possibilities, Lewis, but regardless, this is just a blatantly corrupt system. Merely the fact that we have to figure out, is there completely open corruption or partial corruption? That is a problem in and of itself.
It's obviously a symbiotic relationship between the politicians and the companies, the conglomerates. Do you think that if congressmen could serve only one term, if there was a one-term limit, that this type of thing would still be happening, knowing that they could not get tons of money for re-election from these companies?
I think it still would, because if you're limited to one term, you're going to need a job after being an elected official far sooner. And this is going to then connect these contributions not to the long-term idea that the senator is going to vote on your side or for your cause, but it'll be connected to promises, implicit or explicit, for jobs and consulting gigs and lobbying. So yeah, I don't know that without changing the finance system, that term limits would really make that much of a difference. It might make a difference to some of the elected officials in terms of how they see their roles, knowing that they're just there once and no matter what they do, they're out. That could certainly influence change to some extent.
I guess so. So yeah, clearly term limits alone will not work. We have to change everything. But just a thought.
All right, let's go to your voicemail. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here is the rare positive voicemail that we get every once in a while. It's Thanksgiving week, you know. Why don't we hear something a little positive here?
Hey, David and Lewis. This is Landon from California. I've not yet been able to support you guys financially, so until then I felt obligated to call in and just say thank you for all your hard work. I appreciate what you guys do every day, and I hope to become a member of the David Pachmann Show soon. Thank you, guys. Keep up the great work.
Yes, bye. Indeed. And remember that you can get a free, I have mine here, a free 2015 Patriot Mail calendar with your yearly membership. This is only going on a couple more weeks. Go to davidpachman.com/calendar15. People are loving these, Lewis. Now they have been sent to 5 different countries around the world. The Patriot Mail calendar is free with your yearly membership if you go to davidpachman.com/calendar15. On today's bonus show, 1,000 dead since the ceasefire in Ukraine. CEOs are being paid more than their companies are paying in taxes. And the top 1% of recording artists earn 77% of recorded music revenue. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. We will talk to you then.
The David Pachmann Show at davidpachman.com.